Happy belated Deepavali! Isn't it amazing to live in a multiracial country where we can all celebrate each other's cultural holidays and live in harmony? Well, yeah, it's awesome. But while we celebrate the Festival of Lights, let's not forget that one segment of society has been severely marginalized over the years. So put that murku down for a sec and listen up. How familiar does this sound? Ayo, Indians are all gangsters lah. Indians just like to drink and fight. Criminals, you know. Hold up. Sure, the Indian community, especially the B40 segment, has been plagued by a bunch of issues, including, yes, crime. But these issues are symptoms of the challenges the community faces, and some of it is Malaysia's fault. The first challenge is education. According to the Malaysian Indian Blueprint, Malaysian Indian students have lower pass rates than the national average. In 2015, only 54% of Indian UPSR students passed all the subjects, compared to the national average of 66%. That percentage drops further at the SPM level, where only 44% of Indian students passed, compared to 55% nationally. Things take a bleaker turn when we look at dropout rates. 13% dropout rate at primary school level and 8% at secondary per year, when the national average is 1 and 3% respectively. So that's a poor grade for the community's education. With poor or no results, it stands to reason that employment and pay rates aren't really favorable to the urban poor Indian community. Based on a 2010 survey by a research team from Monash University, 32% of the urban poor Indian workforce had only up to higher secondary level education. 41% had only up to lower secondary level, 11% had only up to primary level, and 5% had no formal education. And that means they had no choice but to take lower paying jobs. According to Department of Statistics numbers, more than 50% of Indians were employed in low-income jobs such as service and sales workers and plant and machine operators in 2015. And those are people who managed to get a job. A relatively high percentage didn't. The average unemployment rate for Indian males stands at 4% compared to 2.9% for Malaysian males overall. The average unemployment rate for Indian females stands at 5.2% compared to 3.2% nationwide. And that leads us to our next point, poverty. On paper, Indians seem to be doing okay. The average Indian household income stands at 6,246 ringgit, which is comfortably in between the Bumiputra and Chinese households. But in reality, that number has been boosted considerably by the community's top 20 and middle 40% earnings. In fact, 83% of the Indian community's combined monthly earnings comes from the T20s and M40s. The remaining 17% is collectively earned by the 227,000 families that make up the Indian B40. For perspective, that's an average of 2,367 ringgit per household, and 10% of this group, or 22,000 households, earns a household income of under 1,000 ringgit. Which then leads to what makes the most sensational headlines: crime. An estimated 70% of gang members in the country are Indians. And according to 2014 PDRM statistics, Malaysian Indians comprise 31% of all violent crime arrests, compared to 51% of Malays and 11% Chinese. And this is while Malaysian Indians only make up 7% of the population. But let's circle back for a minute. How is it possible that such a tiny community holds such a large number of issues? To truly understand the Indian problem, we need to go a bit further back in time. Things were going alright for the Indian community pre-independence. Sure, they were brought into Malaya by the British, pretty much as slaves to work in plantations. But at the plantations, there were free housing and utilities, a steady if small income, and their communities were equipped with schools and temples. Post-independence, however, the large foreign-owned plantations started getting broken up and sold off in smaller parcels. And in any company, restructuring usually results in some people being let go. And that's what happened to the laborers who worked in those plantations. On top of that, Malaysia started diversifying its plantations and moving from rubber to oil palm. That required less labor, so more laborers were let go. And then, in the 80s and 90s, development and industrialization meant that plantations got converted into industrial estates and townships. So, where did the Indian community go?
They were put into a very really low cost flats. Thousands of Indians were just overnight, they lost their houses, they lost their job, no skills, no education.
At this point, Generations of Indians had lived their entire lives in plantations. They were almost completely isolated, they had only ever lived in their own communities, and for the most part, they couldn't even speak Malay. And there were no mechanisms in place to ease integration. And with no skills that could be utilized outside the plantation estates, they couldn't find jobs either.
So they end up taking up odd jobs, and they started getting themselves involved in gangsterism. The gangster problems and all that is after effect of such sudden displacement. The mindset of poor is different, because they got nothing to lose, so they'll get involved. In fact, about boys, they will tell them, hey, if you become a gangster, your lifespan may be about 30, 35 and all that. But they say, sir, when you die also must die with glamour, You see, hundreds of Indian gangsters who have died, how they are glorified. So that's how they think. So we need to change this thinking pattern.
The community was left to fend for itself. Other communities had a support system. The Chinese community had its associations like the Dongzong Association that worked to ensure Chinese children were educated. And the Malays had policies like the NEP designed to increase their economic share. But the Indian community didn't enjoy that sort of support.
Indian leaders, political leaders and communities are so preoccupied with the temple issues and the Tamil school issues, didn't really bother about the employment and their business and all the other things that is more important. See, if you look at the Felda schemes, very well organized. 10 acres of land, there's a house, there's a school, everything was there. For Indians, they didn't have such program. If you really look at the Indian development in the last 20-30 years, there's no real political will to solve the Indian problem.
And that leads to where we are today.
I think the Indian community has been far too long on a self-denial state, that everything is okay with the Indian community, the social organization, NGOs are blowing up issues like gangsterism and all, but it's real. Gangsterism, dropout, breaking of the family institutions, creation of single-parent status, violence in secondary schools, all these are real.
The previous government had in fact acknowledged these issues and came up with a Malaysian Indian blueprint, which introduced solutions including welfare assistance, allocations for affordable housing, and better standards of teaching in Tamil primary schools. The new Pakatan government has also made special provisions for the Indian community in its manifesto, on top of promising to retain the Malaysian Indian blueprint. Of the 22 promises it made in the manifesto, one stands to make the most difference in terms of developing the community as a whole. A special fund for the social and economic development of Indians, modelled after the Singapore Indian Development Association, or SINDA. The government has promised to allocate 4 billion ringgit over the next 10 years, with 100 million ringgit being allocated in Budget 2019 to get the ball rolling. This is really important because it's what helps NGOs keep reaching out to the community. So we have plans. In fact, we have 2 governments worth of plans to help the Indian community, particularly the B40 segment. But the people who work on the ground are worried about what could be the biggest wrench in those plans: implementation.
There are a lot of good government plans have come, but who's going to implement and who's going to monitor?
The Pakatan government has indicated that it is willing to work on these issues. It has already appointed Senator YBP Wethamurthy as head of CIDIC. Originally set up by the BN government, CIDIC works to ensure that NGOs working to reach out to the underprivileged communities receive funding and support. It's also the main agency driving the delivery of the Malaysian Indian blueprint. So let's hold them accountable to keep things on track. There are issues affecting the Indian community, but it's not an Indian problem, and it's time that we stop looking at it that way. Everybody has the right to a dignified life, and we can work together to make it happen. Happy Deepavali. Hello, we hope you enjoyed the episode. Here at Newsflash, we aim to dissect and discuss current topics. So if you have a topic in mind that you want to discuss, let us know in the comments.